My name is Jessica Hennings, and I'm a graduate student in the Human Services Department at Liberty University. My overarching goal for my life is to serve God through my work and with people. The first part of this desire is to impact students' lives through education. I believe that I am called to work with students in enhancing their lives through building relationships with them and enhancing knowledge. This also includes my work in my marriage ministry on weekends with hurting marriages. In both of these areas, communication and conversation is the key to success, but in different ways. In teaching, it is important to communicate to students first that you care in order for them to care what you have to offer. This is done through effective listening as well as effective communication. In marriage, it is important that we are careful listeners, actively involved, but also acutely aware of where the other person is coming from. In order to be aware of where a person is coming from, it is important to know them well. One way to do that is through a personality assessment, such as Uniquely You. As I discuss the different types of personalities, you can see how they interact. On the Uniquely You survey, there are 4 different types of categories of personality. They are task-oriented people who are passive and those who are active, as well as people-oriented people who are passive as well as active. Depending on which combination of those two, a person is help to define their behavioral blend. Different types of personalities each have different strengths and weaknesses. It is important to be aware of your personality type so that you can work on those strengths and weaknesses. As you can see, my personality type is that of a task-oriented individual who can be both passive and active, depending on the circumstances. According to my profile, when the active part of my personality kicks in, I enjoy being challenged and being active and being given choices. It is also important to me to have a leader who gives specific directions in a task and direct answers to questions. I respond well to a leader who is an enabler, who provides the resources as well as the encouragement to take on difficult tasks. My passive side enjoys making sure that things are done correctly and are high quality. I respond well to being given clearly defined parameters that require planning. Being a task-oriented individual who tends to focus only on others when in groups or while working, such as in the teaching environment, I can identify problems that can occur in my communication. For example, by being task-oriented, I can be so focused on working out the problem that I am not listening to the issue at hand. For example, when a person is discussing a problem, I may be so focused on the issue itself that I literally begin practicing ritualistic listening. I begin to figure out how to solve the task at hand instead of just listening. Another issue that was identified is that I tend to become more distracted by my own thoughts. I also noticed that when a problem is occurring, I tend to try to figure out that problem instead of listening to the individual, and I tend to be solution-focused. This can be good, but when it comes to communication, it can get in the way. The third way that was identified was that when under extreme pressure, I can shut down and communication stops. To address the first issue of thinking through problems instead of listening, there are several strategies that can be used to enlarge my conversation. One of the ways is to address this by looking at myself through the 3 levels of listening. I learned that in order to effectively communicate about issues, it is important to communicate on level 1, which is empathetic listening. In empathetic listening, instead of simply trying to solve the issue or task from my perspective, I have to step into the other person's shoes and look at it from their perspective. Essentially, when a person is sharing a problem with you, they are opening themselves up to you and sharing their lives and not the task they're speaking about. This was an important thing for me to think about. Also, the idea of listening as a way of reaffirming another individual as a person. They are communicating a part of themselves, a part of their humanity. Thirdly, it was interesting to find out that it can also build self-confidence in the person who lacks it simply by listening to them. This is especially important when working with teenagers. When people are trying to achieve their goals through a conversation, they will oftentimes create barriers between the speaker and the listener. When I become task-oriented and I am trying to solve problems, this can become a barrier to communication. Part of becoming a good listener is being able to identify what a good listener looks like. A good listener is able to not only hear the information, but is able to process that information and see it from another person's point of view. Sometimes when we are communicating, it is as if we are communicating with ourselves. We are physically hearing the other person, but we are essentially talking to ourselves about whatever the issue is. This is called monological communication. This type of communication focuses on our needs, agendas, and leaves out the other person. Listening is a highly subjective experience. It is important to realize how easily it can be interfered with. A solution to this is when something that really needs to be addressed, and the issue is very important to establish rules between the talker and the listener. This way, each person has an established role, and it is not my role to solve the problem as a listener. As a task-oriented person, empathetic listening becomes my task, and understanding and walking in their shoes becomes the solution as a listener. This changes the problem-solving conversation from an advice-giving session to a listening and empowering session. My overarching goal is to impact children and adults through communication techniques. By applying these techniques into my field of teaching, these can have a greater impact on students. As a teacher, I can apply these enhanced communication techniques to enhance my teaching in future years.